Welcome to Cyber-Recon. Today we're talking more about threats and vulnerabilities, talking about system vulnerabilities, part of your security career, part of getting you ready for the Security Plus certification exam. Let's jump into the slides and see what the heck is going on here with this. All right, 1.6 talks all about explaining the impact associated with types of vulnerabilities. This slide deck, we're going to talk about system vulnerabilities, and these are the three things that CompTIA locks together in this grouping: end of life, embedded systems, and lack of vendor support. So three things you need to know to be ready for the Security Plus certification exam. So without further ado, let's jump into end of life system. So end of life, or EOL, is a term used with respect to a product supplied to a customer, indicating the product is in the end of its useful life from the vendor's point of view, and the vendor stops marketing, selling, reworking, or sustaining it. And that's from our friends at Wikipedia. So, end of life happens to a lot of things, right? Model years change. We see it with cars. There's the end of life for a car. At a certain point, they stop making parts for it. They stop, well, for cars, they kind of support them forever. But at the vendor level at Chevrolet, they stop building parts for it. They go on to the next model year. They go on to the next style. It's more and more critical for our world, where we talk about computer software and computer hardware. At some point, the vendor stops supporting older software and hardware. And they do this because at some point, it's just easier to build a new version and go out and resell it. Maybe there's major things they want to incorporate into it, or maybe it's a rework from the ground up. The big thing from the security point of view is they stop developing updates and patches. They're going to stop patching it. And that's not just feature improvements. That's vulnerability patches. That's security flaws. This could be big things that allow remote access to your system, that allow full admin access to your system. You really have to watch out for end-of-life systems, because when they hit end of life and the vendor stops supporting them, normally you can't get those patches anymore. Normally, if there's a security flaw that comes out that's discovered in that version of hardware or software, you can't fix it. It's just beyond fixing. And this happens all the time. People keep this stuff around because they don't plan for replacing it. It works fine, right? But it doesn't always work fine. A lot of times there's bugs and holes in it they just don't know about because the vendor's not publicizing them anymore. So a lot of vendors will offer extended support that can be purchased for an additional amount of money after end of life. So a couple years after end of life, Microsoft, most of the OS vendors are good at this because they can get more money. So they offer extended support, and extended support normally only covers security patches that cover security vulnerabilities. It doesn't add any new features, doesn't add any new usability, doesn't fix any end user complaints. It just normally fixes the security stuff. These items in your environment are often noted as legacy. People talk about legacy. So we see it a lot. We see a lot of times the end-of-life systems will hang around organizations for a long time when they should be dead and gone. We do see end-of-life impacting organizations pretty hard because they have to buy new stuff. And it's hard to sell to organizational leadership that you need to buy new servers or new operating systems when you came to them for new servers or new operating systems 3 or 5 or 10 years ago, and they remember putting that money out, and now they're, well, why do we have to buy this stuff again new? And you have to explain that to them. This is end of life. This is what happens. It's getting better and better now. We see that organizational leadership now knows that there's this technology debt that has to be paid. We know that systems only last a specific amount of time, and then we've got to upgrade. We've got to get to the new stuff. And a lot of times now there's features that are enticing enough that moves leadership forward. So that's end of life. We have to remember that because we'll come back and visit it again. The other thing we talk about is embedded systems. And this is a computer system that's part of a larger system, right? And that's from NIST. Anytime I can use NIST, I'll use NIST. That's a common ground we can all use. And we see these examples in printers and TVs and cars. Computers are everywhere. They're part of everything. And these systems that are embedded, a lot of times they're Linux systems. We do see Windows systems there too. But a lot of times they're a Linux system that's put in a printer. It's put in your TV. It's put in all kinds of things. Your refrigerators now, ovens, they're all over the place. They can be standalone, just one computer in one system, or it can be part of a larger, more complex system. And the best example of that is a car. A car is a bunch of complex systems put together. And those systems are embedded. There's limited or there's non-existent patching for those systems. They're often used beyond end of life. Often, we don't even think about these things. We buy that oven. We don't think about patching an oven. And in our organizations, we see the same thing. We see devices like temperature control devices. Sometimes small offices or home offices can get something like a Nest thermostat. Inside there, there's an operating system. It's running. A lot of times, we don't scan these devices as part of our normal scanning program. We don't patch them as part of our normal patch management program. And a lot of times, the bad guy, the hacker, black hat, whoever you want to call them, they'll come in, if they can get in your system, and they do what we call pivot, or if you remember back to talking about their hacker techniques, when they get on a device, they can pivot and look someplace else to go. And a lot of times, to maintain access to an environment, they'll jump on or attack or put backdoors into embedded systems like thermostats and temperature control devices and water control devices. Sometimes we call these embedded systems. Sometimes they're part of bigger SCADA systems, which we'll talk about later. But if they can get inside one of these systems and create a backdoor, then as you clean their attacks off the normal network, they can always keep coming back because they're coming from a device you're probably not scanning, you're probably not looking at, you're probably not patching. But we have to make sure that we look at these embedded systems in our organization because we have them. A lot of times these TVs come with the embedded systems in them, and a lot of times for functionality, they'll be attached to the network. So think about what all is attached to your network. Make sure when we talk about things like Nmap scanning, figure out what your IP range is. Nmap scan your IP range and be able to identify everything on there. And that's a daunting task sometimes. But we have to know where these embedded systems are, and we have to make sure we're taking care of them. The last thing we're talking about is a lack of vendor support. Lack of vendor support is when, for one reason or another, the vendor is no longer providing full or partial support to your hardware or your software. It means the maker of the product no longer offers support. Okay, it could be end of life, so the product's at end of life and they've just planned that they will no longer offer support, or they'll offer limited support like that extended support for a cost. Maybe the vendor that implemented the system is no longer available. Maybe it was a third-party vendor you brought in. Maybe it was a consultant or a contract firm that came in to build a system and they're no longer available. Maybe they're not on contract with you anymore. You're not paying them anymore, so of course they're not going to support it. Maybe it's that they went out of business. Maybe the contractor or the consultant group went out of business, or the person or group that made the system, hardware or software, is no longer in business. Maybe the vendor was acquired by another vendor. So the product line maybe is going out. They're stopping the product line because the vendor that made the acquisition, maybe they have their own product line doing the same thing. And obviously the vendor going out of business. So we have to think about these three things. They're the three that go around system vulnerabilities in CompTIA's view of the world: end of life, embedded system, and lack of vendor support. So if you know that, you'll know what you need to know for this chunk of it, get you going for the next part. And as always, I'm Jim here with Cyber-Recon. We'd love to hear your comments. Like, subscribe, hit that bell to be notified, and share with your friends. And as always, be careful out there, and we'll see you next time.